Floodwaters were unleashed in water on Ukraine after a dam was destroyed. The blame game has started from both sides as no one is taking responsibility. Thousands are being evacuated from surrounding areas. This happened at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, which is in the city of Nova Kakhovka in Ukraine's Kherson region, which is currently under Russian occupation. Locals have blamed Russia for blowing up the dam, while the Russian Defense Ministry has blamed Ukraine. Russia says Ukraine wants to redeploy its troops and hence blew up the dam.
Цієї ночі вони підірвали дамбу Каховської гідроелектростанції. О 2:50 ночі стався цей вибух. Абсолютно свідомий, підготовлений вибух. Вони точно знали, що вони роблять. Уявіть собі обсяг водосховища, яке тримала ця дамба, одне з найбільших водосховищ України. І зночі триває затоплення районів півдня нашої країни. Щонайменше 100 тисяч людей жили в цих районах до російського вторгнення. Принаймні десятки тисяч досі там. 80 міст і сіл під водою. І вже почалась евакуація. І це лише первинні наслідки. І, на жаль, вже більше року Росія контролює і цю дамбу, і всю Каховську гідроелектростанцію. І підірвати її якось ззовні обстрілами фізично, і це нереально. Вона була замінована саме російськими окупантами і підірвана ними. І це ще раз демонструє, з яким цинізмом Росія ставиться до людей, чию землю захопила. Та що насправді Росія несе Європі і світу. Це найбільша рукотворна екологічна катастрофа в Європі за десятки років. І це найбільш небезпечний терорист у світі. І тому поразка.
I've heard the reports of the explosion at the dam and the risks of flooding. It's too early for me to make any kind of meaningful assessment of the details of what has happened, but it's worth remembering, of course, that the only reason that this is an issue at all is because of Russia's unprovoked invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We'll continue to assess the developing situation, but of course we repeat what we have said throughout this conflict, which is the best thing that Russia could do now is withdraw their troops immediately. We have always made it clear that we support Ukraine's self-defense, and of course the decisions about how Ukraine conducts that self-defense are rightly decisions which are made by Ukraine's leadership. We want to see this war come to a conclusion quickly, and it has to come to a conclusion which is fair, which is right for the people of Ukraine, and of course is a conclusion which reinforces rather than undermines the UN Charter and the concept of sovereignty and territorial integrity. So we will continue to work with Ukraine as it defends itself against this Russian aggression.
Meters. So like 2 pairs or 3 pairs of these people could do the same. Already been removed all surface threat in terms of.
I can already say that the destruction of Nova Kakhovka dam brings the targeting of civilian infrastructure and civilians in Ukraine to unprecedented new level. And of course the European Union condemns strongly this horrific and barbaric attack against such a crucial piece of the infrastructure with terrible humanitarian and environmental consequences. And it's obvious that this is happening in the context of the illegal Russian aggression, within which Putin did not hesitate to employ hunger as a weapon, energy as a weapon. He weaponized winter. He is playing a nuclear gamble with nuclear power plants in Ukraine. So this is, again, new escalation, new sign of escalation.
Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency has called on Ukraine and Russia to spare the Zaporizhzhia cooling pond for the nuclear site, as it will have a major impact.
Our current assessment is that there is no immediate risk to the safety of the plant. We are following this by the minute, as you can imagine. The IAEA staff on the site have been informed that the damage to the Nova Kakhovka dam is currently leading to about 5 centimeters per hour reduction in the height of the reservoir. The team continues to monitor this rate and all other matters on the site. The main line of cooling water is fed from the reservoir and pumped up through channels near the thermal power plant to the site. It is estimated that the water through this route should last for a few days. The rate may reduce as the water lowers. There are a number of alternative sources of water. A main one is the large cooling pond next to the site that by design is kept above the height of the reservoir. As the reactors have been shut down for many months, it is estimated that this pond will be sufficient to provide water for cooling for some months. The agency will confirm this very shortly. It is therefore vital that this cooling pond remains intact. Nothing must be done to potentially undermine its integrity. I call on all sides to ensure nothing is done to undermine that. The consequences may be grave. My trip to ZNPP next week was planned. Now it's essential. I will go. I will keep the board informed as developments unfold.
Now let's get to our guest. I'm joined by Ben Aris, Editor-in-Chief of the BNE and former Moscow Bureau Chief of the Daily Telegraph. He's joining us from Berlin. Thank you, Ben, for joining us on CNN News 18. A huge development coming in from the war zone. How do you see this attack on this dam?
Well, as you said, no one's taken responsibility. It was definitely a deliberate act in so much as a dam like that cannot be destroyed by simple shells or even a rocket that's gone astray. It needs to be bombed. You need to drop a charge down to the base of the dam in order to cause the kind of damage you've done. And here we see 11 sections out of 28 that have been damaged. So this was definitely on purpose. As to the motive, that's not clear. Both sides are denying it. Neither one wants to take responsibility. And there's various factors at play. I mean, this river, the water in this river is the water supply to the Crimea. And so if it was Russia, then it's effectively cut the Crimea off from its only source of water, which will be a huge problem. However, against that is the military aspect of it, because this is an enormous amount of water. It's the size of the Salt Lake as in Salt Lake City in the States. It's a huge amount of water, and you're going to flood the whole delta. And then that will make the whole southern part of Ukraine along the riverbanks impassable. And given that we're expecting a counteroffensive by Ukraine any day now, the whole southern stretch of the front line has now been flooded and is impassable, which shortens Russia's defensive line. And so from a military point of view, that this is actually to Russia's benefit. Ukraine, as you pointed out with the report, the main effect of this, apart from the catastrophic destruction and flooding and evacuation of 100 villages and cities, is the danger to the nuclear power plant, which can't run because it needs this water. And again, that power plant was never in danger of being bombed. The superstructure over it is designed to withstand a plane crashing onto it, but without water, the nuclear power station can't be cooled. And then that's how it'll go into meltdown. So potentially this is extremely serious. We could end up with another Chernobyl type scenario if the water is not supplied to the power plant, if somehow it's not, new sources of water are not found.
Right. So you're saying that there is the chance of a new Chernobyl happening because the nuclear plant is not being supplied with water for its cooling operations. When it comes to that entire nuclear site, who has proper jurisdiction over it? Do the Russians or the Ukrainians?
No, it's in disputed territory. I mean, the fight has been going backwards and forwards, and the IEA has been desperately, and the international community have been desperately trying to make some sort of, if not ceasefire for the whole country, at least a ceasefire around the nuclear power station, because this is the biggest active nuclear power plant in all of Europe. It has 5 reactors. And as I say, it's been hit by missiles and fire, but it was never really a danger. But the cooling water has always been the key concern here. And as the IEA spokesman was saying, there's a pond next to it. So it's probably got water for a month, and the cooling ponds in tanks inside the plant are also full. So there's no immediate danger. But if that cooling pond gets damaged and the water drains, then you've got a huge problem. The plant's been shut down, but the reactor, the core is still there and needs to be cooled. Again, it could be Russia's escalating this and turning this whole thing into a nuclear drama. In addition to its threats of nuclear weapons, now it's got this ticking time bomb in the form of the nuclear power plant that it can also threaten to damage and then make huge swathes of central Ukraine uninhabitable for hundreds of years.
Right. So when it comes to this this dam blast, Ben, decode for us the immediate impact of this attack and the destruction of this dam in the Kherson region. Also, does this feed into what many experts are saying, that Putin is now, given the challenges that he's facing for his war machine in Ukraine, he's now trying to just solidify a buffer zone in this area so that there can be a war of attrition in the long term between his war machine and the Ukrainian forces?
Indeed. I mean, there already is a war of attrition. I mean, we've just seen the battle for Bakhmut, the city in Donbass, go on for 8 months. And then finally it was resolved, but it was a Pyrrhic victory in so much as there's nothing left of the city. And Russia has made no territorial gains since it lost territory in September when the Kharkiv and Kherson offensive happened. And by the same token, Ukrainians have made no progress. They haven't taken back any territory, any of the major cities other than Kherson. And so they've been bashing away at each other without much result. However, it's quite clear that Ukraine is gearing up to do a major counteroffensive. And I've seen reports of like hundreds of tanks and hundreds of thousands of shells being shipped to Ukraine, but they're not appearing on the battlefield. And clearly these arms and armament are going to be used in what should be a hammer blow, a spectacular counteroffensive. But I think that might be the reason, if I want to speculate, why the dam has been blown up. Because as I say, you then make a large section of Russia's front line between the two impassable. You shorten the line, it makes it easier to defend. You can concentrate your troops, you can get rid of any weaknesses. And given that we're expecting that counteroffensive to start any day now, then the timing of this, I think, is very significant because we've seen already Ukraine moving troops into position, and now Russia's countered with what can be seen as a defensive move. But again, this is all speculation. I mean, both sides have said very little. They're releasing very few details, and the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has specifically asked the public journalists not to tweet, not to share information, to go onto lockdown in order that they have some element of surprise when this attack, should it happen, happens.
Absolutely. There's also an information warfare going on at the same time. Ben, please stay with us now. Amid this attack, the International Court of Justice was conducting hearings on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The Ukraine ambassador said that the dam blast shows Russia is a terrorist state and blamed it for the destruction of the dam in southern Ukraine. Ukraine also says Russia has created a climate of violence and intimidation against non-Russian ethnic groups.
Under the leadership of President Zelensky and with the courage of the armed forces of Ukraine, Russia cannot defeat us on the battlefield. So, it targets civilian infrastructure to try to freeze us into submission. Earlier today, Russia blew up a major dam located in Nova Kakhovka, causing significant civilian evacuations, harsh ecological damages, and threatening the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia's actions are the actions of a terrorist state, an aggressor.
Right, so that is the drama coming in from the ICJ. Ben continues to be with us on the broadcast. So Ben, we also see this posturing that is taking place on the international stage between Russia and Ukraine. But beyond semantics, of course, the truth is the reality of the battlefield. Now, as we were earlier discussing as well, that Russia pushed in the war machine, it had the draft policy as well. And the thinking in 2022 was that Russia could steamroll across Ukraine. But now clearly that hasn't happened given Western intervention and the pumping in of Western arms and ammunition. In the long run, do you sense that the territory of Ukraine that is under Russian control would just remain a buffer zone of proxy warfare for months to come now? Is that going to be the new normal between the two countries?
Well, indeed. I mean, the gentleman was just speaking about targeting civilian infrastructure. I mean, this is actually, to be frank, something that Russia learned from NATO forces during the campaign in Serbia, where NATO also bombed all the power stations, took out 80% of Serbia's power infrastructure. So it's kind of standard tactic to disable the economy of your opponent. Nevertheless, the murders, the massacre that was in Bucha will be on the pale. I mean, that's a sort of unpleasant things we haven't seen since Nazis and the Second World War, with the executions that they carried out. In terms of the conflict, both sides are dug in, and the fact that we've just had 8 months of basically a slugfest that produced no results at all suggests that the chances of either side winning this war on the battlefield seems very unlikely. And that all sides now are starting to push slowly for some sort of ceasefire as a prelude to peace talks. But it seems to me at this stage, given the performance of both armies and the size of the Russian army, that we're headed towards some sort of frozen conflict. Russia will not, under any circumstances, give back Ukraine. I don't think they'll give back Donbass or the land bridge down to Crimea. Sorry, they won't give back Crimea. And I don't see them giving back the Donbass nor the land bridge either, unless they're pushed out, which in theory they could be. Crimea is a bit of a fortress. But that means that this will not be resolved. The best we can hope for is a ceasefire. And then we end up with a situation like Northern Cyprus or the Berlin Wall, that kind of ugly solution that at least brings peace. And then the talks will stretch out, and it's not just months we're talking about, it's decades that those kind of talks will go on. And leave Russia pariahed in Europe and leave the sanctions in place. But unfortunately, leave a big chunk, 20%, 18% of Ukraine under Russian occupation with some sort of demilitarized zone, as in the North-South Korea divide, where that will be haggled over for the next generation of diplomats going forward.
Right. And my final question before I let you go, Ben, when it comes to Putin's position inside Russia, we've discussed this before, that currently he is politically bulletproof. There's no opposition to him currently in Russia. But in years to come, do you see his political clout within the country, crumbling slowly and slowly as this war of attrition only escalates?
No, I don't. Simply because the Russians are on board. And those that would have protested and were against, and the opposition leaders, such as they are either in jail or in exile. You had 1 million Russians, the young, talented IT professionals, the new Russians, the liberal, Western-looking Russians, they've all left. However, the majority of the population, there's still like another 145 million people, they're behind Putin. And even those who are unsettled by the war, who don't like it, who think Russia was wrong to go into Ukraine, even those are saying that, look, this is our Russia, and now this war has started, albeit for the wrong reasons. We stand behind Russia. We can't lose. This has become existential. And the argument Putin's been making that we're under attack by NATO is actually a pretty easy sell to the Russian population, because all of the armaments and all of the training that Ukraine's getting is NATO. So it really does look like them that they're under attack. And then people do what they usually do in situations like this. They rally around the flag and support the president, support their boys in the field, even if in principle they think it was a wrong decision to start the war. So I don't see Putin losing his grip. The elites are not happy about this, but the same problem they have is that Russia's now committed and there's no way of backing out. it's possible we'll see some sort of compromise next year when there's presidential elections. I hear rumors in Moscow that Putin may not stand for re-election and put in some sort of compromise candidate, a new guy that the West can deal with, and that might open the door to actually starting to unwind all of this. Because again, here in Berlin, German businessmen, they want to go back to work. They were making a lot of money in Russia. It remains a huge market. So there are people who want to see a way out. But again, it's going to be a long, slow, painful diplomatic process that I think will take years to unwind. And even then, Ukraine's going to remain, large chunks of it are going to remain under occupation. I don't think that's going to change in the foreseeable future.
Right. Thank you, Ben Harris, for sharing your perspective when it comes to the continuous military tussle between Ukraine and Russia. And now the war is only escalating. And as Ben was pointing out, it's a war of attrition now that could extend into decades.